So today we're walking down the old railway track, and I've been thinking about just not exactly the definition of yoga, but what yoga is and what yoga isn't, because of various conversations and communications I've been having with people recently. Sometimes getting quite steamed up about what yoga is and what yoga isn't. And I thought it would be interesting to have a conversation around that topic, because one of the main things that's coming up in conversations I'm having at the moment is there's a lot of these newfangled ideas like yoga for something, and it's almost like these days it's like you could have yoga for twigs, yoga for sheep, yoga for shoelaces, yoga for mice.
We've got yoga for weight loss, yoga for kids, yoga for pensioners, yoga for people suffering from XYZ. Yoga for smokers, I've seen.
Which in a sense is fair enough. But it's just
but
seems to be kind of out of control. You've got these hybrids like yoga lattes. Like what's that? That's yoga and pilates and the yoga size, yoga exercise. But it seems to me that the danger here is yoga's becoming so diluted, and it's just losing a lot of its force because it's just being blended with this and that, and it's losing its power and potency, and it's losing what it could give people because it's becoming too spread too thin.
Well, there's a lot of things going on there, and I don't know whether you've asked me a question here, but what you have done is
I'm sort of setting out a problem, I suppose.
You've mapped out again a vast territory. And a question that's pretty complex if you kind of.
But I would like to ask a direct question here. And this probably wouldn't be where you'd want to start with it. But what I would like is, I would like you to say, in your opinion, because we know that you can't say yoga is definitely this. Some people think that they can, but it doesn't have an absolute rock solid, concrete, unchanging, through the ages definition. That's what it is. So fuck off if you think it's anything else. Does it? So we know that, but I would like to hear, just in your own words, what your idea of what yoga actually is. So maybe we could start with that and move on to all the other stuff.
Well, I have my own formulations, as you know, and I just say yoga is letting be with bright awareness. Right, that's the practice. And yoga is radical openness to what is, whatever is. That's the yoga being state. And the rest, all the other talk about it really is to do with persuasive definitions. Now, a persuasive definition, this will be a philosopher's jargon for you. A persuasive definition is a definition of something that's given by somebody as a part of a dispute or a polemical engagement with other parties. So it's to do with trying to win an argument in order to establish dominance. And a lot of the definitions of yoga that go around are actually just plugged straight into that political game. Particularly the arguments that we get around innovation versus culture. Now, I remember at some kind of public meeting where I'd been called upon to speak for 5 minutes about yoga and so forth, saying that the Yoga Sutra is not one of the big yoga texts. It's a canonical text of yoga, but the Yoga Sutra was interpretable. And somebody, a learned Brahmin, pops up and says, no, it's not. It's got one meaning, one truth. It says one thing, but what that is, you have to be a certain type of person to understand that, and it's kept secret by his particular gang of wallers, you know. So what we've got there is a persuasive definition that's partisan for tradition, or at least a particular version of what tradition is supposed to be. Over and against this, the modern yoga scene, as we've both kind of just mapped out, it's full of these innovations: yoga lattes, yoga for boxing, you know, all this kind of stuff, and all kinds of hybrid forms, and everybody feels totally kind of free to dream up wherever they want to. And you know, when you're faced with the kind of crassness of a lot of that stuff, which is just so obviously branding, marketing, commerce, consumer capitalism at its very worst.
Yeah,
you know,
it's really, really depressing. Well, that's applied to yoga. It's really depressing.
It's crass.
Yeah.
It's crass, and you kind of start having these little whinges of sympathy with the traditionalists.
Yeah, and it basically, I mean, in my opinion, it just feels like all of that just destroys yoga.
Yeah.
It's very, very destructive and corrosive and poisonous.
Yeah. But at the same time, I'm certainly not somebody who's going to adopt a position that the Yoga Sutra isn't interpretable, and that certain Indian nationalists are not actually playing a political game with yoga, and that's kind of politics at its worst, if you ask me. So I say a pox and a plague on traditionalists for their lack of circumspection when it comes to considering the matter of interpretation.
Yeah.
Even within that tradition, 10 minutes after Patanjali's dead, somebody's offering an interpretation and somebody's offering a slightly different one. And the whole history of the yoga texts is one of exegesis and commentary and interpretation.
Yeah.
I would actually say we have no choice about that.
Yeah.
We have no choice about that, and in fact, it's not a bad thing. It's a great thing.
No, it's very useful, because even if you get it wrong and go down a line of inquiry that's completely a dead end, you still learn a lot from that. Yeah.
So a plague on the preposterous claims of traditionalists, but a plague on the it is really just the crassness. When people with dollar signs in their eyes get hold of yoga.
Yeah.
Now, okay. I mean, that leaves us in a fairly nuanced condition. You know, if you like me are not going to settle in either of those positions, you've kind of, and you're going to think about this in terms of, well, where is the boundary? Where is the boundary which includes everything that's yoga and excludes everything that isn't yoga? You're going to find that it's pretty tricky, because historically we're looking at a massively broad church. If we say, let's just take a look first of all. Let's make a cultural investigation and an historical and an anthropological investigation. And this comes down to what are the people who've claimed the word to describe themselves or name themselves? What have they actually been doing? What have they actually believed? You know, that's one approach, and it's an approach that makes you realise that you have a massively broad church. The word has been used by Vajrayana followers, Buddhists in other words.
Yeah.
As well as 1,001 varieties of so-called Hindus, as well as in more modern contexts, pretty well with relation to most of the world's major faiths. I mean, there are books on the shelves with titles like Christian yoga.
Yeah.
Taoist yoga is fairly common. I mean, there is a Chinese word. But what we're actually seeing under that rubric, Taoist yoga, is a whole load of practices, a whole load of models of the human being that are pretty well almost identical to the stuff that's found in the Indian in the Sanskrit texts.
Yeah.
Similarly, within Sufism, again, we find the same forms. We find the same forms within the Christian mysticism of people like John of the Cross and Teresa of Avila, and also in the Zen-like utterances of somebody like Meister Eckhart. Is it 12th century Dominican friar?
Yeah.
Whatever, friar's the wrong word then. What do you call them? Dominican priest. So. The point here, the point of that ramble that I'm trying to make is this is a bloody broad church,
Yeah.
Where is the boundary? There are some forms, some cultural forms, some behavioural forms, some practices that seem to kind of hover on the edge. They hover on the edge, and you find that the boundary is actually kind of a bit permeable. It's a bit fuzzy. I think on this basis that you're not going to get a definition of yoga. That the act of trying to define yoga automatically becomes a persuasive definition. It becomes partisan straight away.
Yeah.
The minute you open your mouth.
Yeah.
You become partisan if you try to define.
Yeah.
And by defining I shouldn't just give it the technicality of definition. I'm using the term a bit more strictly than is used in common speech, and I'm saying that a definition of anything is a set of necessary and sufficient conditions which must obtain of a thing for that thing to fall under the definition.
Yeah.
And necessary and sufficient conditions. So just to understand that a little bit, it's a necessary condition for being a horse to be an animal.
Yeah.
Yeah? An inanimate object can't be a horse.
Yeah.
It's necessary that this thing that we're claiming is a horse be an animal before it can take on its status of hoarseness.
Hoarseness, yeah.
But it's not a sufficient condition. It's not a sufficient condition because a cat's an animal and a cat's not a horse.
Yeah.
So it's not a sufficient condition. A sufficient condition is a condition that if it applies, that's it. The argument's over.
Yeah.
The thing's a horse. So if it's got 4 legs, it's gramnivorous.
Gramnivorous.
Yeah, and if it has the particular configuration of DNA known as horse DNA, those are sufficient conditions for the creature to be a horse. So sufficient conditions are rather like this. It's sufficient for something to be an animal if it's a horse. It's also sufficient for something to be an animal if it's a cat. So you can see there what sufficient conditions are. Now definitions of something or another, a definition of X gives us a set of necessary and sufficient conditions for X to be X. And that's how that works.
So you say we can't really do that with yoga?
No.
No.
It doesn't fall under that pattern. Now, it's the common prejudice that everything that you speak about must lend itself to definition.
Yeah.
And it took Wittgenstein to actually turn around and say, actually no, language doesn't really work like that. Maybe we'd like it to work like that because it's kind of tidy. But it doesn't.
Yeah.
Some things work like that. Some terms work like that, but there's a good many that don't.
Yeah.
And a good many terms actually work through what he calls family resemblance. And the example he gives, the famous example, is that of a game. You try and define a game. This is what you do with undergraduates. You say to them,
hello.
Right.
Get down there!
Hello.
You say to them, go away for half an hour to the coffee bar and break up into groups of 3 and come back with a definition of a game.
Yeah.
And just try it, basically, I say to people.
Yeah.
Because you can't.
Yeah.
I mean, what are the common properties? What are the necessary and sufficient conditions that apply to solitaire on the one hand and World of Warcraft on the other?
Yeah.
What are they?
Yeah. Yeah.
And you find that actually the term game works perfectly fine.
Yeah.
And it works through family resemblances. And Wittgenstein gave us a metaphor for that. He said, imagine the portraits of an aristocratic family. And generally they have a portrait gallery in the stately home, going right the way back to the guy who came over with William the Conqueror or something. And you notice, that you can tell instantly they all belong to the same family.
Yeah.
Even though that one's got the nose. That one hasn't got the nose, but he's got the eyes.
Yeah.
And through this kind of a skein of resemblances that you get the ability to recognise a member of that family. And it's the same with game, The conditions for something to be a game don't fall under this kind of neat mathematical regime. Instead they're kind of related. One game's related to another, which is related to another, which is related to another.
Yeah.
The first and the last games in that chain will scarcely resemble each other, because they've got their game list from the thing that's adjacent to them.
Yeah.
And he likened it to a rope made up of lots of short fibres.
Yeah.
Twined together. And the fibres are not very long, but yet you can make a rope 100 yards long that's perfectly strong out of lots of short fibres.
Yeah.
And and yoga's a bit like that. The term yoga is a bit like that.
I'd like to mention, I would like to pop in and also say that there's a similar thing around the definition of art.
Yeah.
Because art and yoga to me are quite similar. So can I interject that at some point?
Yes, say it. No. It's a good point. I could kind of digress here a little tiny bit and say that with art...
recording now?
Yeah.
Oh yes, sorry.
That with art... You even have a problem with family resemblances being too strict, since the purpose of art can be to explode the definition of art from within, as in Dada and Surrealism and so on. And I say art is actually an explosive concept because it's got built into it self-criticism. Art can be the subject of its own inquiry, just like philosophy.
Yeah, so for me then, sort of yoga and art is similar in the sense that we know what it is, but it can't have this rock solid definition like you're saying. Yeah,
and I'm saying that probably yoga's a bit more on the family resemblance end than art is, but it's not entirely without its explosive capacities. In other words, it can redefine itself culturally as it goes along. Hence, I would defend the notion that innovation is still possible in yoga, and that it's not the finished thing that the traditionalists are claiming. It simply isn't, because the human being's not the finished thing.
And also because yoga is moving into an age, and it's playing a big part in the development of an era, the like of which the planet has never seen. There have never been societies and people quite like us. I mean, in many ways, we are our ancestors' descendants. Of course, we are. 2 legs, 2 eyes, DNA, etc. But there's never been technology like we've got. There's never been a population of approaching 7 billion on the planet. There's never been the ability to communicate at lightning speed with anybody on that planet. There's never been the possibility of travelling to all parts of that planet in short periods of time.
Yeah, it's a very unique time.
It's a very unique time, and yoga has to be anything alive at all, has to be able to communicate with the people of that time.
Yeah.
Now you might say that, well, okay, it's only the language with which it's communicating that's changing, but the essence is staying the same. I mean, that is an argument. That is an argument, I think. But certainly, the yoga considered as a cultural form, which as a cultural form you have to investigate historically, discursively, anthropologically, and so on. That is definitely up for revision, and it's going through a major revision. Whether traditionalists like it or not, whether anti-capitalists like me like it or not, it is going through that. It's an historical movement.
Yeah.
I actually think innovation is possible, because what yoga opens up for the individual human being is a sense of his own infinite depth, of his own infinite spaciousness as a consciousness.
Yeah.
And therefore, however wonderful our ancestors and predecessors were in exploring the human psyche, there was always further to go. Mm. I mean, this is the teaching that doesn't change. There is always further to go.
Yeah.
I would say. And anybody who rests and comes to settle, it's premature. It's always premature.
Yeah.
Now there's an amazing quest for finality, for final rest amongst human beings.
Yeah.
Because life of all sorts is tumultuous. It's stressful, man.
Yeah.
And we want rest. We want the final complete enlightenment, which is the end.
Yeah.
We have nothing more to discover. But actually, it's bullshit, really, to be honest with you. It's not what is discovered, and I don't think it's what our ancestors discovered either. So, I'm defending the innovators against the traditionalists, but I'm saying that we have this kind of crass commercialism and shallow innovation that's based on nothing. So what's happening there? Well, I'd be wanting to say that this is commerce pure and simple. Yeah. This is consumer capitalism pure and simple. This is commodification pure and simple. And as you know, I've written about this stuff, and it has nothing to do with yoga as an inquiry into the human condition. Nothing to do with it at all. It's to do with branding, and why people come up with something like, I don't know, yoga for ferrets, or yeah. Yoga oxo, or whatever they want to, and these portmanteau words, yoga for this, yoga and that. All this stuff is to do with capturing the attention of the public with gimmicks as a means of getting the money. And there's a lot of people in modern yoga, it's certainly like modern Western yoga, who just simply do not see that. They don't see it. The business of America is business, and what I notice about that in the yoga world is that the first thing you do once you decide you're going to be a yoga teacher is think, what about my brand? What about my business competence? And once a certain large yoga organisation, they're not going to name because they've got enough money to sue the arse off me. Nevertheless, you look at their communications and it's all about that. It's all about, you might as well go to a business school.
Yeah.
It's all about that, all of it. But the interesting thing is that the people uttering this crap and the people buying it are completely oblivious to it. They have no objectivity about it. They're caught up in it. It's like, you know, when the fish is in the sea doesn't notice the water because it's its element.
Yeah.
Well, the business of America is business.
Well, we're not just saying that all Americans are like that.
No, we're not. I'm talking about a trend. I'm not, you know, there's plenty of people see through it, but it's a trend that results in a load of discourse. In other words, you know, I'll get emails off this organisation that I've mentioned, giving out their programmes and when's the next business seminar and all this kind of shit. You know, how to keep your clients, and it's all, you know, how to deal with insurance, blah blah. It's all this kind of stuff, and they are blind to what's happening. They don't see that yoga as an economic activity needs to be considered precisely as that. You know, it's not the only way of considering it, but I'm saying because of this family resemblance thing, because of the controversies, that we need to consider yoga culturally, which I've just kind of done in a very sketchy way, which means that you engage in its history and in the discourses that surround it at the moment, in its anthropology, and you look at the text also, and that's one thing. But the next thing, that once you've done that, you need to consider yoga as an economic activity. This is before you get to yoga as a spiritual practice. All these things, you see, it needs, given its actual complexity and the actual complexity of the problem, you do have to use a number of perspectives.
Yeah.
And there's two: a cultural perspective on it, and an economic perspective on it.
Yeah.
I'm going to say that commerce really does distort modern yoga. It distorts it, but by distort, I don't mean it takes it away from some doctrinal purity, as laid down by a committee of Brahmins in the 2nd century AD. I don't mean that. I mean it distorts it because it takes away its interiority. See, one thing is defining. It's the interiority.
Yeah.
You know, is that it's an exploration of the human condition on the plane of interiority.
Yeah.
It's about what it feels like to be human.
Yeah.
So that's the thing that gets bracketed out the minute you take it into you turn it into a product.
Yeah.
It stops being a living thing in which people do relate to each other through it. You know, we've talked about the whole conundrum of teaching.
Yeah.
And I'm saying that that's actually a living relationship. You know, that really has got all the kind of fleshiness and juiciness of living human relationships. And that's what that's about. The minute you turn it into a product, that relationship is severed.
Yeah.
I mean, Marx put it wonderfully. He said, everything is reduced to the cash nexus.
Yeah.
You know, you go to the supermarket and you stand at the checkout in the queue. You might pass some pleasantries with the woman on the till and say, are you all right today? And lovely weather, isn't it?
Yeah.
But that's the extent of it. There's not like a human relationship there. All that's got to happen is that the money passes over. In fact, these days you do it with a robot, don't you? You scan your barcode over the scanner, and you don't even have to have a human interaction. It's commerce.
Yeah.
Everything's the cash nexus in commerce. Yoga can't operate with that.
But also,
and franchising and all the rest of the bollocks that people are fucking getting into, you know, branding and all this. It's sick.
One of the other ways that it severs the connection is because once it's yoga for something, yoga for boxing, yoga for weight loss, yoga for golfers or for I don't know, whatever, it becomes goal orientated.
Yeah.
Doesn't it?
Yeah.
And once you start doing yoga with a goal, you're not really exploring.
Yeah.
You know what was your term? The let him be with bright awareness.
Yeah, you're not exploring.
You know, exploring what's going on with you now.
Heading for a goal is not exploration, but of course that is my persuasive definition, that it's exploratory, rather than goal orientated.
Yeah.
Rather than programmatic.
Yeah.
Which again, you know, if it's not programmatic, if it isn't a set of foolproof procedures, again, like the traditionalists believe, but if it isn't that, it also means that it's a broad church.
Yeah.
Different strokes for different folks.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in fact, everybody's a unique individual.
Yeah. So they're going to be having their own explorations in different ways, because everyone's got different stuff to explore.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, obviously there is some kind of common denominator there, because we're all human. But at the same time, we have to take recognition that common humanity is also inflected infinitely, with infinite variations on the basic shape.
Yeah.
And again, that makes yoga that makes yoga of necessity a broad church. I mean, historically it's a broad church because it was a kind of a rump, really, in some ways. At a time when there was great turmoil across the world in the axial age, but particularly in India when the Buddha established Buddhism. You know, he established the Sangha. So he established, which is a community of practitioners of his method.
Yeah.
That in doing that, he created an institution. And the Sangha, of course, in countries where Buddhism is influential, the Sangha is an institution, like the House of Lords or the Church of England.
Yeah.
You know, and that, in a sense, kind of protected it from some of the effects of the fuzzy boundary that we find around spirituality, or that we find around yoga. You know, it has this fuzzy boundary, doesn't it? Mm. And all of the problems we're talking about result directly from the fuzziness of that boundary. Buddhism is splitting off from the Shramana tendency out of which it was born, and institutionalising itself. Was much less prey to innovation that wasn't circumspect.
Yeah.
Much less prey to it. It wasn't completely protected from it, but much less prey to it. And similarly, you know, Jainism, when it formalised, the same thing. And then, of course, the Vedic religions did the same thing in response to that, with the Sanatana Dharma, and yoga getting incorporated into the Sanatana Dharma was perhaps an attempt to get that kind of security, illusory security, that Buddhism got for itself and Jainism got for itself. And it kind of worked, except the hairy fuckers in the forest carried on calling what they do yoga. It's kind of like whatever gets left behind, whenever the spiritual experimentation arises in certain communities in a big way, like it's doing now in the modern world. Whenever that happens, the rump is always called yoga. It's like the leftover.
Yeah.
It's the bit where the broad churchness can happen.
Yeah.
It's a bit where the experimentation can happen.
Yeah.
And so the cultural phenomenon of modern yoga is like a push and a pull between these institutionalising tendencies on the one hand, and the absolutely experimental nature of authentic spirituality on the other hand.
Yeah.
You know, all complicated by the fact that the whole thing fell right into the lap of consumer capitalism when they realised they could make some money out of people's concern for their existential situation in a bewildering age.
Yeah.
So I actually see at least three factors impacting on the future development of yoga. One is commerce, which, as I tried to describe, distorts. But the other is religiosity, which is the stupidity of traditionalists claiming that it's all been done, it's all finished. Of its nature, it's never finished. of its very nature. That is what you discover.
Yeah.
Practice what Patanjali suggests, you will discover that.
Yeah.
Even practice what it says in the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, and you'll discover that.
Yeah.
I don't know about the Bhagavad Gita. I think that's like a piece of political bullshit, but, to be frank. But yeah, we could talk about that another time.
Yeah.
So religiosity gets in the way, and religiosity is always produces definitions of yoga that are persuasive. In other words, they look for definitions instead of realising that this is a term that works through family resemblances and internal explosion. They don't realise that. They can't realise that. They're not allowed to realise that because their allegiance is to their own group ego, to their own particularity. So religiosity, smelly shit. The third thing is superstition, and obviously that ties in with the second thing. The superstition, and because yoga meditation can throw you into the irrational, throws you into the fairy tale lands of the deep psyche, which is pretty irrational. So you get a lot of mix up between yoga and new age anti-rationalism, and that I think is driven by wish fulfillment fantasies. That's driven by turning away from having to find out what's going on with you by taking an absolutely kind of hard, cold look. You know, what people find there is unacceptable and frightening, they turn to superstition. Frightened people are always superstitious, and yoga's got mixed up with that as well. And in a sense, the kind of insecurity of modern life is driving people in droves to inverted commas be spiritual in one way or another. You know, and yoga's tangled up with all that as well.
Yeah.
But the three things, all of those miss, as far as I can see. And they don't miss because they don't fall inside the definition, because there isn't one. And perhaps even all of these tendencies belong inside the pale of yoga, because yoga is this kind of chaotic rump where all this stuff plays out anyway. But they miss because they just refuse to register the nature of yoga as inquiry, at least as far as practice is concerned.
Yeah.
And the use of the term to designate an exalted being state, or an ordinary being state, 2 inches off the ground, whichever way you want to look at it.
Yeah.
They miss that as well. You know, so as you can see, it's a bit of a tangle. So there are people out there, and in fact there are definitely people out there who are wanting to give some account of all this. I kind of suggest that you look at the use of the term yoga and culturally. I'm just recapping here now, and that means, you know, looking at text, looking at history, and as far as we can, getting some sense of how interpretation works. Looking at anthropology, i.e. looking at practices in that anthropological sense, and that's a cultural consideration of yoga. But also we need an economic consideration of yoga, because there's practices, there's things that people do, it's always embedded in an economy. Even if you beg because you want to be a holy yogi and you're just going to beg, you're still engaged in economic activity. And similarly, if you set up a limited company to market your yoga logo, or whatever it is that you've invented, all right, whatever it is that you've invented to make yourself distinct in the marketplace, we need to investigate all that. But of course we also need to investigate it as psychology, as phenomenology. Actually, and that means you investigate it in its own terms, you know.
we investigate the claims of the yogis and the poetic utterances of the yogis in the terrain of the laboratory, which is ourself. That's what we do. And when yoga does that, it's investigating itself in its own terms. But if you're going to sort out these crass Facebook squabbles, social media squabbles, and thin magazine articles, you need at least those three approaches. At least those three. And I'm the man to do it.
Well, because certainly,
we'll cut that out.
The definition is being, there's actually there is like an actual war over the definition of yoga at the moment.
Well, no.
That's how I see it.
Well, there's been one ever since.
Yeah, I suppose so.
Because it's the rump, there's a war over it.
Yeah.
And some people, some gangs go off and sulk and build their little fortress and all go inside the pale of Buddhism or Sanatana Dharma or something. That's the kind of a sulk,
Sulk.
Because of the rabble just fighting all the time. Who's got it right? What really is the real thing? Look at this bunch of idiots standing on their heads.
Yeah.
If God had wanted you to stand on your head, he'd have put some feet there and all this, and the whole blah blah, of it. Yeah, there's a war, and it wouldn't matter. It's kind of comical. It wouldn't matter except it impacts on people being free to follow their weird.
Yeah.
And to go down the labyrinthine passageway that they need to go down because it's them.
Yeah.
And that's how they are. Because the war's over definitions. As I've said, all definitions are persuasive definitions, and you only need to persuade or impose your definition in order to wield some power over the scene. And in this case, power also equals considerable revenue. Billions and billions of dollars are spent on yoga in the modern world.
But also there are people who are struggling to be heard, who have, like us, not a rock solid definition, and that's being used against them.
Yeah. It will do.
But,
it will do. Well, I have it used against me all the time.
Yeah. But they are joining the discussion, the debate, the fight.
Yes.
Because they feel very strongly, that, me included, that what's actually happening with the people who are coming out with the strong definitions, especially ones who have an obvious commercial line, are in the business of actually damaging people.
Yeah.
It's like they are actually hurting people because they're denying them the opportunity to really do some yoga.
Yeah.
And what will happen is those people will go along, do some, what basically is maybe it's just a fitness class.
Yeah.
Kind of maybe hurt the back a bit.
Yeah.
Because they've been pushed too far. And then think, oh, is that what yoga is? Oh, well, that's kind of crap. I'll go off and do something else, and they don't explore it again because I thought, well, I've done that. That's what it was, and I didn't like it.
Oh, we do have an ersatz version of what it is circulating, and it makes the most noise as well, I think.
Yeah. And it's like anything. Whoever shouts the loudest gets heard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it doesn't produce anything except kind of flim flam.
Yeah.
Superficial flim flam. The underneath stuff, where there is genuine meeting, acting as a potentiator for people's exploration and flowering out of that exploration, has always gone on. And it's always been persecuted, from what I can see. And it's persecuted now. Obviously in a different way. I don't think I'm in much danger of getting burnt at the stake.
But there's certainly been some kind of concerted attempts to make my life a misery.
Yeah.
Because I'm sticking to my guns about my absolutely inviolable right to explore myself and to share myself with others.
Yeah.
And because you speak out occasionally against all the things that are standing in the way of that.
Yeah.
It's commercialism, superstition and religiosity. Not to mention stupidity.
Well, there is that, yeah. I mean, sometimes, I've seen people kind of arguing various points that are still going to be damaging to people, and they're just doing it because, well, they don't know any better.
Yeah.
I suppose. They don't always have a commercial line or anything, but as you said, if they've only explored a little bit of the way, they think, oh, that's it, I'm going to push that, and that's the way it is. And it's like when this is a very important thing that yoga teachers need to understand, is that the yoga experience can be very different from person to person. I didn't realise this right at the start. I thought that people were going to have the yoga journey, the yoga exploration, in the same way as me. They were going to experience the same things.
Yeah.
But having lived with other people who were doing it all as well, and hearing their stories, and over the years lots of other people's stories, I realise it's vastly different.
Yeah.
And the danger is that as a teacher, if you think you've cracked it, you've experienced it, and this is the way it is, and you're trying to push your students in that direction as well, which may not be the right way for them. I mean, if you're not aware how different the experience could be, then I suppose you wouldn't do it any differently. But this is an important thing for people to know.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that shows how flexible and sensitive the so-called yoga teacher has to be. I mean, even just on the level of do no harm, let alone actually positively help somebody. It's harder than people think.
Yes, a lot harder.
Even though, I don't want to knock anything that lets people be a bit fitter and healthier and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
I don't want to actually kind of knock that. There are ways of, and there are kind of fairly obvious ways of sorting that out. And it's a bit of, if you can manage that, it does help you to have a good life. Which is no small thing again. I'm not against the good life, I'm not against it.
No.
Bring it on.
Yeah.
We
like being happy and enjoying our lives as much as the next person, don't we?
Absolutely.
Probably, maybe even a tad more.
Bring it on.
But I will go further with what I was saying about people's yoga experiences being vastly different. I would say that not just vastly different, but absolutely unique. I mean, the ways that when I've been working with people and their experiences, I know some people who had yoga experience that no one else I've ever met has ever had.
Yeah.
It's absolutely unique to them.
Yeah.
And same way, certain things I've had, I've never met anybody who's had it exactly like me either.
Yeah.
It is very unique.
Now again, some of our traditionalists might say, no, it's actually a well marked out track that we can take stepwise from ignorance, avidya, to knowledge, vidya, and it is, a stepwise process.
Yeah.
And they say that, and their practices mirror that, because the practice is that you do X for so long, you do Y for so long, and it's absolutely regimented. But what's happening there isn't why it produces the same result. Everybody gets the same experiences if you do that, more or less. Much more similar than what you're talking about anyway. But it's because they're not exploring, they're imposing.
Yeah.
This is about producing a certain character structure.
Yeah.
Through manipulation
and moulding and modelling. You know, and so it does produce far more uniform results than what we're talking about.
Yeah. I mean, there's certainly a commonality between.
Of course there is.
So I'm not saying it's all completely different, but
no, it's not.
for instance, there's certain realisations that one tends to arrive at if one explores yoga in the way that we're describing. But the way people can come to those realisations, again, is completely unique. One person will be blissful, another person will be agony.
Yeah.
One person will take 10 years, another person, a week.
Yeah.
Somebody has to do years of very, very hard physical yoga to release things enough to come to that realisation, and somebody else only needs to sit.
Yeah. Well, I think we're kind of coming back to civilisation here, so maybe we want to.
So we've been through quite a few things there.
Yeah.
Bit of a ramble, but it's all interesting, and certainly that's what I wanted to talk about today.
Okay.
These conversations that we have, although we do structure them a little bit so that for you listening to it, it'll make it a bit more useful. But these conversations that we have are actually the conversations that we have when we go off for a walk. These are the things that we really talk about.
Yeah.
So we just decided to record them.
Yeah. This is the daily stuff.
Yeah. This is what we do all day. Anyway.
Over and out.
Over and out.
Copy that. Roger.